Hello again, everybody. I'm Roger Hoover. Glad to welcome you back to the Crimson Tide Sports Network, and it's time for The Other Booth. It's presented by U.S. Wellness Meats. Their animals eat like a champion. They're grass-fed and pasture-raised to U.S. Wellness Meats. Their animals eat right, so you can too. Visit them at uswellnessmeats.com. Save 15% by using the promo code BAMA. As we're talking on this Tuesday afternoon, it's Alabama football getting ready to take on the LSU Tigers this Saturday in Baton Rouge, and now we're joined by the voice of LSU, Chris Blair. And Chris from Baton Rouge, how's everything going as we talk on Tuesday afternoon? Because obviously we know a lot can change between now and Saturday.
Yeah, it's doing well. I'm doing well, and it's good to join you, Roger. But yeah, it's hour to hour, day to day. I mean, it seems like it's a little more impactful this week, but the truth is, since the start of the season, I think every school, whether it be in the SEC or any school trying to pull off football in 2020, I mean, that kind of is the world we live in, where you get to play a game and you're thankful you got to play the game and finish the game, and then you re-rack everything on Sunday and Monday, and then you go into that week based on tests and based on information whether or not you get to play again. So that's kind of where we are once again here this week.
And, of course, we're hearing some reports that several position groups are down to very thin depth if LSU is able to play. Have you heard much on the numbers, what it could be looking like at this point for LSU, or what has Coach Ogeron said?
No, he's been pretty close to the vest. I mean, from what we've been able to, ascertain through media reports, it's more about, making sure everybody has been tested. Those tests have been verified, and in some cases, I imagine, which I'm sure Alabama fans are familiar with, they test again to make sure that it is a positive or it is a negative. So there's really no numbers publicly being, offered up. But I've heard the same things you have, which are there have been position groups that are either without scholarship players or they're down to one scholarship player. We don't know the numbers. It hasn't been released as the number of players overall. And obviously that doesn't allow us then to figure out which groups have been hit the hardest. But obviously there's a concern, and I think that concern started, this past weekend and even grew yesterday on Monday of the week as to it could be an issue. And obviously it is an issue now. And obviously the decisions are being handled and those conversations are being held at a much higher level.
Well, as we talk now, the game is still on for Saturday between Alabama and LSU. And let's just take a look at this LSU football team. 2-3 on the season coming into this game with Alabama. What has stood out in the 2 wins and also what stood out in the 3 losses?
Well, I'll start with the losses. I mean, I think it starts defensively. It's just it's been a very, very uncharacteristic defense for LSU. And you can go back 10, 12, 15 years if you would like. The argument's always been, or the frustration for the most part has always been LSU's offense and their inability to maybe score the points they need to win. Certainly that's been the issue over the last 5 or 6 years as offenses have become, the driving force in college football. And so when you come into this year, you kind of think, okay, you did change from a 3-4 base to a 4-3. So there'll be some bumps in the road, so to speak, again, without having spring football to install that with a new coordinator. But I think it takes all of us by surprise that, the problems continue, and they seem to be similar problems going back to week number 1, where they're just busted coverages. That's something that you rarely see. I mean, it's one thing for in one-on-one coverage for a receiver to make a play and, do that. But when there's really no competition because they're wide open running down the field or they're wide open across the middle of the field, and then you go back and you watch the film and you realize that, there were a lot of players that were not on the same page or they were confused as to where their assignment was. That's very uncharacteristic, and that's been a problem, going back to week number 1. It looked a little bit better in the Vanderbilt game. It looked much better against South Carolina. But then it looked similar in the loss to Missouri up in Columbia, and it looked very similar in the loss to Auburn on the Plains a couple of weeks ago. So defensively, it's just kind of hard to fathom how those changes impacted the way they're playing on the field. And again, I'm not in that locker room, and I'm not in the practices day in and day out. So it's easy for me to sit here and criticize. But I think from just a 10,000-foot view, it's been kind of a head scratcher as to why the defense has played the way they have, really through 5 weeks of the season. Offensively, outside of the Auburn game, I think coming into the year, Roger, people felt like, how could you even come close to replicating the numbers and even the points that you were able to score in 2019? And for the most part, even in the first two losses, I mean, you were putting points up on the board. It again falls back to defense unable to get a stop. But then against Auburn, again, you've been without Miles Brennan now for 2 games. TJ Finley looked great against South Carolina, and then not so great when things started to roll south against Auburn. It just kind of snowballed quickly. But I think that's kind of, you kind of get accustomed to that when you play a true freshman. There's going to be times where they look very, very good and in control, and then there's going to be times when they look like true freshmen. And that's kind of the case you have now. So offensively, for the most part, I would probably give LSU a B-. Defensively, I think you're probably not passing at this point. At least that's listening to Coach Ed Ogeron. He's not been pleased with it at all. So I'd say they don't have a passing grade as we sit here 5 weeks into the year.
You mentioned the quarterback situation. Miles Brennan has been out some with injury, and then TJ Finley, Max Johnson. Just kind of what's the situation at quarterback heading into this game for LSU in a best-case scenario?
Well, on Monday, Coach O, came out right out of the gate and said Miles Brennan would not be available for this weekend. He then followed up by saying he may not be back for the rest of the year. I mean, it may be an injury in which they need to, go ahead and shelve him and do the things that are needed medically to get him back to full health. Again, he didn't say that was confirmed, but he said he's starting to be told by the doctors, physicians, and trainers that might have to be the way they go. So that leaves you with TJ Finley and Max Johnson, the only other 2 scholarship quarterbacks that LSU has. And right now, Coach O said last week, coming into the off week, that the competition would go back to even. Going into that Auburn game and even the South Carolina game, he made the decision that TJ Finley would be the starter, although he said you would try to see both. In the Auburn game, he got pulled early in the second half, and Max Johnson took over. Hard to say because the game was so lopsided at that point. It wasn't out of reach, but it was pretty close to being out of reach. They're similar in a lot of ways. I mean, they're going to run the same offense. There's probably a little more RPO with Max Johnson and TJ Finley than there is with Miles Brennan. Brennan's more effective when the run game is going and he's able to work off play action, where both Finley and Johnson are pretty comfortable running the RPOs, a lot of which you saw last year with Joe Burrow. Johnson's more of a running threat. He's a fast quarterback. He's faster than Joe Burrow, and we all know Joe had the ability when called upon to get the yards you need. So Johnson's probably a step faster and was a dual threat quarterback in high school. Finley more of a pocket passer and a strong arm. So as we sit here on Tuesday going into the game, I don't know that O has designated who the starter would be. I imagine as we get closer to the game that he will. But right now it's kind of been we've been led to believe that it's a competition to see who will get the start, not only this week, but moving forward possibly the rest of the year.
A few minutes ago, you talked about the challenges this LSU team has had on defense. Now they get ready to take on an offense in Alabama that has a lot of things going for it. Who are some playmakers that can help try to slow down what Alabama is trying to do?
Well, I think, it's going to start, and Coach O is going to talk about it. You got to get pressure on Mac Jones, which, again, that's much easier said than done based on the way he's played and that incredible offensive line that Alabama has. But, when you look at the success, if you want to look at some bright spots for LSU's defense, it would be the front four, and namely B.J. Ojulari, one of the defensive edge rushers, has been phenomenal. I think he surprised a lot of people at how he's been able to come in and impact. He needs to get a little bigger in the coming years, but he's got a high motor and has a nose for the football, so he does a tremendous job. And then, of course, Derek Stingley. I mean, if Derek Stingley doesn't play well, there's 2 ways Derek Stingley plays well, Roger, and that is, one, he takes half the field away and everybody avoids going that way, which limits an offense, at least from a geographical standpoint. Or if you're going to go at him, then he's got to play well, because more times than not, he's going to be on the key receiver, in this case this weekend, Devontae Smith. So that's a battle. I mean, you're talking about 2 guys who are going to make a very good living at the next level going at it for X number of plays in a ball game. But really, those are the two guys. They've struggled at linebacker. Jabril Cox is a grad transfer that transferred in from North Dakota State. And I think it's taken him a little time to adjust to Power 5 football. He's had good moments, and then he's had not so good moments. Micah Baskerville played well in the last game, even in a loss, but he'd been kind of quiet the first 4 games of the season. And then Damone Clark, a guy that a lot of people felt like could be the headhunter at linebacker this year. He's been the same way. I mean, he's had some great games where he's got double-digit tackles, and then there's games where he's completely out of position in the middle of the field, has been a gold mine for the opposition. But I think Ojulari and Derek Stingley, I mean, there are two guys that can rally the cause, and if they play well and they get a little bit of help from guys around them, I guess I'll put it this way. The best way to put it is if Ojulari is held at bay and Derek Stingley has a bad day, it's probably going to be a long day for LSU.
Well, last year it was a big day for LSU against Alabama. We just passed the 1-year anniversary of that game at Bryant-Denny Stadium. And as Chris, you kind of look back, it was a storybook season for LSU, one of the best college football seasons we've ever seen. How big of a chapter in that storybook season was the Alabama game for LSU fans?
Well, for fans, yeah. I mean, that's the key. For fans, it was probably the biggest piece. I mean, I know that sounds crazy to win the SEC title game against Georgia, boat race Oklahoma, and then in the second half pull away from a very talented, Clemson team. But, I mean, let's face it, when you've gone nearly a decade without a win in a game that you feel like is the game every year, and I know Alabama has the Auburn game that is the game every year. And then there's really not a natural rivalry for LSU. So really, when you look back to the 2011 season and how that played out, that kind of created that rivalry, maybe even more so for LSU than Alabama fans. Although I know Alabama fans certainly circle this game. And maybe there's a little bit of respect, not a whole lot of love lost between the two fan bases. But for LSU, it was a huge part of that season. I mean, let's face it. I dare say that had LSU lost to Alabama in that game, somehow found a way into the college football playoff and went on to win a championship, there'd still be that one little piece that was missing as far as LSU fans are concerned. I think that's the best way to describe how big that win in Tuscaloosa was. Number one, because it was a long time coming. And number two, it was another piece in a 15-0 season. So without that, people would have been excited, but I think there would have been something missing. And that's how big that game was.
Well, we are in the era of COVID-19, and with that, we're seeing social distancing at stadiums all across the SEC and the nation. So as we start to wrap things up, what kind of atmosphere have you seen so far at Tiger Stadium? It's known as really one of the best in the SEC, but Saturday evening, a little bit earlier, a kickoff coming up this week between Alabama and LSU, but what has the atmosphere been like inside one of the best places in the league, Tiger Stadium?
Well, it has been different, and I know it's been that way at Bryant-Denny for some of the big games you guys have. But between COVID and hurricanes, we've only had 2 opportunities to play at home. And those 2 opportunities, obviously Mississippi State and then the win over South Carolina, it is extremely different. But I will say, give Tiger fans credit. I'm not sure the exact number that were there. But it was a loud venue, much louder than obviously the road venues have been at so far this year that also had social distancing. But it's not the same. Coach O talks about it. When you go on the road, typically you have to create your own energy. This year, I think every team is faced with having to create their own energy within their home venues. And hopefully there'll be 20 to 25,000 fans in attendance. I know there's some tickets still available for that, even limited capacity. So it's kind of hard to figure, how many people will be in there. But it certainly is. It's not the same. And I think all college football fans, certainly across the SEC, can vouch for the fact that it's great that we have football, and we shouldn't be complaining about whether or not you have 102,000 there or 20,000 there, because we are getting to play the games. But as well as I do, part of the fun of college football are those atmospheres, and that's been a big missing part here in 2020, unfortunately, with what we've been facing.
Well, we certainly hope that everyone at LSU continues to be healthy. Certainly hope this game can be played because it is such a fun matchup each and every year. And Chris, we just thank you for spending some time with us today on the network and giving us your thoughts on the LSU Tigers. All the best to you.
Oh, thank you, Roger. Thanks for having me on. Look forward to seeing you guys over here in Baton Rouge this weekend.
Look forward to it. That's the voice of the LSU Fighting Tigers, Chris Blair. I'm Roger Hoover. Thanks for watching the Crimson Tide Sports Network.